Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really timeless, mythic story from our sources that just perfectly dissects the anatomy of a grudge. We are looking at a tale that honestly has it all. We've got deep social hierarchy, fragile human ego, and the absolutely spectacular unintended consequences of revenge. It's a story that asks a pretty fundamental question. What actually happens when someone is utterly humiliated by their closest friend? We're going to trace how an incredibly pure, idyllic boyhood bond completely curdled into a bitter, kingdom-splitting rivalry. It's a fascinating look at how status and power can just fundamentally rewrite our relationships. But to truly understand the explosive end of this friendship, we have to start at the very beginning, with a rather unusual birth. Section 1. The Pot-born Sage, Origins of Drona. Now, what's genuinely fascinating here is the literal translation of our main character's name. Drona literally means the pot born. According to the text, a great rishi named Bharadwaja, who was this man of immense wisdom and really rigid vows, was at the river Ganga. There, he saw a celestial nymph, an Apsara named Ghritachi, whose robes had been blown away by the wind. And despite his extremely ascetic lifestyle, the sage felt this sudden surge of desire, causing his vital fluid to come out. He preserved this fluid in a pot, a Drona, and believe it or not, from that very pot, a son was born. This boy was Drona. He grew up studying all the Vedas and their branches, and he was deeply rooted in the ascetic, spiritual life of a Brahmana. But Drona wasn't flying solo. His father, the sage, actually had a very powerful friend, King Prishata of the Panchalas. Around the exact same time Drona was born, the king also had a son, named Drupada. So the really crucial point to grasp here is that the prince of the realm and the poor sage's son were raised together. They shared this idyllic boyhood, playing and studying side by side every single day at the sage's asylum. Out there in the forest, away from the royal court, there were no kings or peasants. They were just best friends, completely and entirely equal. Section 2. A bond broken by status, the reality of power. Well, adulthood hits our two friends very differently. King Prishata passes away, and Drupada ascends to the throne of Panchala. Practically overnight, he's surrounded by unimaginable wealth, power, and the incredibly rigid hierarchy of the royal court. Drona, on the other hand, remains a poor Brahmana. He's incredibly learned, for sure, but materially, he's destitute. Desperate for some wealth to support himself, Drona decides to reach out to his old childhood best buddy, fully expecting a warm reunion. He walks right up to the new King Drupada and says, "Know me for thy friend." And this is the devastating response he receives. King Drupada looks right at his former playmate and says, "One of low birth can never be the friend of one whose lineage is pure." I mean, just imagine the shock. Drona comes with open arms, leaning on years of shared childhood memories, and he's met with a cold, completely impenetrable wall of social class. This absolutely perfectly illustrates the brand new worldview Drupada has adopted. Just look at these rigid rules of friendship he lays out to Drona. He explicitly tells him that non-kings simply cannot be friends with kings. Those who don't fight in chariots, non-car warriors, cannot be friends with car warriors. He dismisses Drona entirely based on this intense obsession with hierarchy and status. He even asks Drona, "Why dost thou therefore desire to revive our former friendship?" Drona is just left standing there, totally and utterly mortified. The humiliation burns deep, and in that very moment, the seed of a truly monumental revenge is planted. Section 3. Acquiring the ultimate weapons, seeking supreme power. So Drona needs power, and he figures out a highly strategic way to get it. He gets word that the great Brahmana hero, Rama, is retiring to the woods and giving away all his wealth. Drona rushes over to him, hoping for some financial support. But when he finally arrives, Rama tells him he's already given literally everything away, except for his body and his weapons. Drona doesn't miss a single beat. He asks for the weapons, but more importantly, he asks for the mysteries of their use and their withdrawal. And Rama agrees. Boom. By absorbing Rama's knowledge, Drona obtains the most exalted of all weapons, the supreme Brahma weapon. The text is super clear about this. This acquisition gave Drona absolute superiority over all men. He goes from being a dismissed, poor sage to literally the single most dangerous man alive. The power dynamic has officially shifted, even if Drupada doesn't know it quite yet. Section 4.
The Preceptor's Revenge, a methodical plan. Drona's calculated rise back to the top happens in 4 distinct phases. First up, he travels to the capital of the Kurus, which is a city named after an elephant. There, his reputation catches the eye of the patriarch Bhishma, who actually presents his grandsons, the Pandavas and Kauravas, to Drona as his pupils, paying him handsomely with great wealth. Drona is now the royal teacher. He trains these young princes, particularly the Pandavas, until they become incredibly skilled in arms and just deadly sure of their aims. And then the trap springs. Once their training is fully complete, Drona tells his students that they have to pay him a preceptorial fee, something he has cherished in his heart for a very, very long time.
Because you see, Drona didn't want gold. He didn't want land just for the sake of having land. He looks at his elite students, led by the mighty Arjuna, and gives them this single command. Drupada, the son of Prishata, is the king of Chhatravati. Take away from him his kingdom and give it unto me. The only fee Drona wanted was the absolute, total humiliation of the man who had mocked his poverty years ago. He is straight up using his newly minted royal army to settle a deeply personal childhood score.
And the Pandavas do exactly as their teacher asks. They march right on Panchala, utterly defeat Drupada in battle, and take him and his ministers prisoner. Try to picture the scene. The proud King Drupada, who once scoffed that only kings could speak to kings, is brought forth in chains and dropped right at the feet of the poor Brahmana he had so callously rejected. Drona's victory is absolute. Section 5. An uneasy forced equality, the twisted terms.
Listen very closely to Drona's chilling words to the vanquished king here. He tells Drupada, "Because none who is not a king deserveth to be the friend of a king, I am resolved to divide thy kingdom amongst ourselves." Drona is directly quoting Drupada's own cruel rules right back to him. He completely weaponizes the king's own obsession with status. Drona basically says, "You told me we couldn't be friends because I wasn't a king. Fine, now I own your entire kingdom, but I'm going to give half of it back to you so that we are finally equals again and therefore fit to be friends."
To force this really twisted compromise, Drona splits the kingdom of Panchala right down the middle, using the great river Bhagirathi, or the Gamka, as the dividing line. Drona takes the north for himself, and he leaves the south to Drupada. He artificially engineers this 50-50 split of power, wealth, and status. Drona looks at this bizarre arrangement and declares that they now have a permanent, eternal bond. He got his half of the kingdom, and at least in his mind, he completely restored the equality they once shared as boys out in the forest.
But we have to step back and ask ourselves a really fundamental question here. Does forced equality ever truly erase a humiliation? The text tells us that Drupada agreed to this quote-unquote eternal friendship out loud, and the two men returned to their respective halves of the kingdom. But inside, the thought of that crushing defeat and public humiliation did not leave Drupada's mind for a single second. The source text actually concludes by telling us that, sad at heart, the king simply began to waste away. Sure, Drona achieved his revenge, and he got his royal status, but instead of reviving a friendship, he basically just managed to forge a lifelong simmering hatred. It's a pretty powerful reminder from these ancient texts that, while you might be able to conquer a kingdom by brute force, you can never really conquer a human heart the same way.